They gave Black Cadets the worst planes. He made it the most feared fighter in Europe. The outcast swings. The Alabama Schwoon beat down mercilessly on Tuskegee Army Airfield in the summer of 1970, but it wasn't the heat that made Second Lieutenant Marcus Stone, Washington sweet. It was the sight before him, a row of PBOG unchullis aircabras, their pain already chipping engines that cawed like tubercular patients, and a reputation that twisted them like a funeral procession. "These are your birds, gentlemen," Captain Holloway announced with barely concealed contempt, his southern drawl dripping with satisfaction. The white officer surveyed the group of black cadets with the same expression on a might reserve for spoiled mate. "The PBOG unchullis. I'm sure you've heard the stories." Marcus had heard them all. While white squadrons received the sleek PBOG Ekano Mustangs and the powerful PBOG Shotchullis Thunderbolts, the Tinshobotrishan fighter group, the first black fighter pilots in use, military history, were given the aircraft that seasoned pilots refused to fly. The PBOG unchullis had a nasty habit of tumbling into uncontrollable flat spins. Its rear-mounted engine made it nosebby and unpredictable, and its performance at high altitude was so poor that European pilots joked it was only dangerous to the men flying it. "They're death traps," whispered Jim's Quick Patterson, Marcus' wingman and closest friend since basic training. "My cousin wrote me from the Pacific," sighed the boys. "They call them nine dogs, because they don't like to get off the ground." Marcus studied the aircraft with the intensity of a chess master examining an opponent's opening move. While the other cadets muttered complaints and exchanged worried glances, something shifted in his mind. He thought of David, facing Goliath with nothing but stones and faith. The young shepherd hadn't complained about inadequate weapons, had used what he had with perfect precision. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. She'd recited ex Samuel Shulu, shot to him 1,000 times growing up in the Birmingham slums, whenever the world tried to tell him he was less than others, because of his skin color. "They gave us these planes for a reason," Marcus sighed quietly, running his hand along the PBOG unchullis fuselage. "They expect us to fail. They want us to fail. But what if we don't?" Quick looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Stone, these birds can't climb above 15,000 feet without gasping for air. German fighters operate at 25,000. It's simple math. Then we don't fight at 25,000 feet." Marcus' eyes gleamed with an idea forming. "We fight where these planes are strongest." If you're already hooked by Marcus' determination to turn disadvantage into victory, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This story gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens when Stone Washington takes to the skis. Let's continue. Captain Holloway watched Marcus with narrowed eyes, as if trying to decide whether this young black pilot's confidence was admirable or simply ignorant. "You think you know better than the Army Air Forces, Lieutenant?" "No sir," Marcus replied, snapping to attention. "I think the Army Air Forces knows exactly what they're doing. They gave us a puzzle. And I intend to solve it." Over the next 6 weeks, while other cadets grudgingly accepted their fate and flew the PBOG unchullis according to standard doctrine, Marcus obsessed. He studied every flight characteristic, every quirk, every supposed weakness of the Airacabra. He flew headed down, at dusk, in crosswinds and calm air. He pushed hit to the edge of hit performance, enveloped and then half an inch beyond. What he discovered would change everything. The PBOG unchullis rear-mounted engine, which made hit unstable at high altitude, gave hit an incredibly tight turning radius at low level. Had heavy nose armament, a Side-Trishman cannon firing through the propeller hub, plus 4 30 caliber machine guns, made hit devastating in head-on attacks where other fighters had to aim through their wings. Head Carstel doors allowed faster bailouts than any other fighter, potentially saving lives. But most importantly, Marcus realized something that the white commanders who'd assigned these planes had overlooked. The PBOG unchullis was a knife fighter. She wasn't built for the gentleman's duel at high altitude. She was built for the street brawl down low, where speed and altitude mean less than reflex and courage. "It's like Gideon's army," Marcus explained to his squadron on an evening, gathered around a table in the segregated mess hall. The other pilots listened skeptically as he sketched diagrams on napkins. "Remember the story? God told Gideon he had too many soldiers. Made and woodle 30,000 men down to just 300. Everyone thought they'd be slaughtered. We all know how that story ends. Stone, Side Lieutenant Robert Preacher Williams, who'd been a seminary student before the war. But those 300 had God on their side. So do we, Marcus replied. But God helps those who help themselves. We've got shatash pilots and chullish pbiog unchullish that nobody else wants. We're going to become so good at low-altitude combat that the Luftwaffe will pray we don't show up. The training intensified. Marcus drilled his squadron in tactics no one had ever used before. They practiced coming out of the Sunat German bombers from below, where the Iraq's speed in a dev made hit competitive with any fighter. They rehearsed coordinated attacks where Onepi Biog Unchullish would draw enemy fighters down to low altitude, where the others waited in ambush. They learned to use the plane's tight turn radius to spiral inside the wider turns of supposedly superior aircraft. The white officers at Tuskegee watched with a mixture of amusement and scorn. But Colonel Benjamin Davis-Jr., the first black graduate of West Point and commander of the 300 watched with growing interest. Lieutenant Washington, Davis called on an evening after a particularly aggressive training exercise. Walk with me. They strolled along the flight line as the Alabama twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Davis was a man of few words, carrying the weight of representing his entire race in the military establishment. You're training your men like they're going after fighters, Davis observed. Our mission is bomber escort. Yes, sir. But when German fighters attack our bombers, we won't be escorting, we'll be hunting. Davis stopped, turning to face Marcus. The Air Corps gave us these planes expecting us to fail. Some of our own people think we should be grateful just to be flying, even if it's death traps. But you see this as an opportunity. Sir, when David went to face Goliath, his brothers mocked him. King Saul tried to give him armor and weapons David couldn't use. But David knew that God hadn't brought him that far to let him fail. He used the weapons he knew, the sling and stones that everyone else thought were inadequate. Marcus met his commander's gaze steadily. They gave us stones, sir. Let's make them remember David. A smile dusted across Colonel Davis' face, the first Marcus had ever seen. Then we'd better make sure you get your chance to face Goliath, Lieutenant. The 300 ships out to Italy in 3 weeks. The Mediterranean soon blended off the Adriatic Sea as the 300 fighter group touched down at Ramatelli airfield in Italy, March 1940. The base was a sprawling collection of tents, metal hangars, and muddy airstrips carved from what had been Alep grooves. And everywhere were the looks. White bomber crews watched the black pilots unload their PBOG unchullish with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. The segregation that Marcus had grown up with in Alabama was alive and well in Italy, only now it wore an olive uniform. I heard they're giving us the colored squadron for escort, when a bomber pilot muttered loudly enough to be heard. Might as well paint balsies on our fuselages. Marcus tightened his jaw but said nothing. Words wouldn't change minds. Only actions would. If you're feeling the tension building, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps more people discover this incredible true story of courage against impossible odds. Now, let's see what happens when Stone Washington finally meets the enemy. The mission briefing came on their third day in Italy. Major Whitmore, a white bomber commander with medals covering his chest and prejudice covering his face, led out the operation with barely disguised disdain. Gentlemen, you'll be escorting BBOG Jubish liberators on a bombing run to Steyr, Austria. Aircraft manufacturing facilities. The Luftwaffe will defend it heavily. Whitmore's ease swept over the black pilots with the warmth of a January wind. Yuppie biog unchullis will fly top cover at 20,000 feet. Marcus raised his hand. Sir, request permission to modify formation positioning. The room went silent. Junior lieutenants didn't question mission parameters, especially not black junior lieutenants. Excuse me. Whitmore's voice could have frozen vodka. Sir, the PBOG unchullis performance ceiling makes 20,000 feet suboptimal. Request permission to fly escort at 12,000 feet, with quick reaction capability to drop to deck level if enemy fighters approach. The tactical manual specifies high cover at The tactical manual was written for P-Biog Ekanus and P-Biog Shatchulis, sir. Different aircraft, different tactics. Marcus stood his ground, aware that every eye in the room was on him. Sir, if German fighters come at the bombers, they'll dive from altitude. If we're already low, we can intercept them in their dive or draw them down where our barge are strongest. Whitmore's face reddened. Are you lecturing me on tactical doctrine, Lieutenant? Colonel Davis stood smoothly. Major Whitmore, if I may. Lieutenant Washington has trained extensively in low-altitude interception tactics. His approach is unconventional, but sound. I recommend we allow the Tinshubotrishan to execute escort using their preferred methodology. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, Whitmore nodded curtly. Fine. But if a single bomber goes down because your methodology fails, there won't be enough of the Tinshubotrishan left to escort a supply convoy. The next morning, 15 Bibiog Chubish liberators lumbered into the sky like pregnant elephants, each carrying pots, pounds of bombs toward Austria. Surrounding them, like dark guardian angels, flew 18 Bibiog Unchulis Eracabras with the distinctive red tails that would soon become legendary. Marcus led his flight at Baro Hajar feet, he sees constantly scanning the bright morning sky. The bomber crew's radio chatter crackled in his headset, nervous jokes, equipment checks, and underneath it all, the unspoken question, would the colored squadron really protect them? Bandits. Bandits. 2 o'clock high. The call came from a bomber tail gunner. Ka 12 no, 15. Messerschmitt Actionoish. Marcus shot them immediately, deadly sharks sniffing down from Pochish Hajar feet toward the fat bomber formation. This was the moment that would define everything. Red Squadron, this is Red Leader. Marcus' voice was calm as a Sunday morning. Remember training. They think they're the hunters. Let's show them who the prey is. Break on my Mark 3 Toone. Mark. The 18 Biog Unchulish Stin scatter or climb to meet the threat like conventional doctrine demanded. Instead, they dropped, plunging toward the earth in a coordinated dive that put them between the bombers and the attacking Messerschmitts, but bots, schween no feet below the German fighters. What are they doing? The bomber pilot radioed. They're diving away. But Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. The German fighters, committed to their attack dive, couldn't easily pull up. And as they passed through Ponero Hajar feet, chasing the bombers, they found themselves diving into a hornet's nest. Now! Marcus shouted, hauling his Biog Unchulish into a nearly vertical climb that made his vision gray at the edges. The Arakabra's engine screamed protest, but responded, head tight turning radius allowing hit to point hid no skeward impossibly fast. The lead Messerschmitt never knew what hit him. Marcus shied Trishman cannon barked once, a sound like God's own hammer, and the German fighter's wing sheared off in an explosion of metal and flame. Around him, the sky erupted into cheers. Quick Patterson's Biog Unchulis latched onto a Messerschmitt's tail, his machine gun stitching a line of holes from engine to cockpit. Preacher Williams, who'd been praying lovely over the radio, sent a German fighter spinning toward the Austrian mountains trailing smoke and fire. But the Germans were veterans of years of combat. They adapted quickly, trying to use their superior high-altitude performance to regain the advantage. They're climbing. Quick warned. Stone, they're getting above us. Let them, Marcus replied, a fierce grin on his face. Keep protecting the bombers. Don't chase. Stay low. Stay where we're strong. It was the discipline that saved them. While the German fighters climbed back to altitude, trying to set up another attack run, the Biog Unchulis stayed faithfully with the bombers at Baro Hajar feet. When the Messerschmitts dove again, they met the same deadly reception, Aracabras that seemed to appear out of nowhere, climbing impossibly fast from below, those devastating Scheidt Trishman cannons barking death. The Germans broke off after the third attempt, having lost 6 fighters without downing a single bomber. The radio frequency erupted with bomber crew cheers. Did you see that? The colored squadron just saved our asses. Where did they learn to fly like that? Marcus didn't celebrate. He knew this was just the beginning. Had proven that unconventional tactics could work, that the so-called worst planes could be deadly in the right hands. But he'd also just painted a target on the Tienschulbotrischen's back. The Luftwaffe would come for them now, in force. As they escorted the bombers home, their formation intact, not a single loss, Marcus thought of another verse his grandmother had taught him: "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." They'd given him weapons everyone's sight couldn't prosper. He was about to prove them all wrong. One of the Tienschulbotrischen's success spread through the Allied air base in Italy like wildfire. Within a week, bomber crews who had initially dreaded being assigned the colored escort were specifically requesting them. The P-Biog Unchullis with their distinctive red tails became known as Red Tail Angels among the bomber boys. But success bred scrutiny, and scrutiny revealed enemies closer than the Luftwaffe. General Marcus Kane, no relation to Marcus Washington, but sharing the biblical antagonist name with unsettling appropriateness, arrived at Ramatli airfield on a April morning with an entourage of white officers and a mission, proved that the Tienschulbotrischen's success was a fluke. This is where the story takes an intense turn. Drop a comment below telling me what you think General Kane is planning. And while you're down there, make sure you've subscribed. This channel brings you the most incredible untold stories from history. Let's continue. Colonel Davis, Kane announced without preamble, "I'm implementing new operational protocols for the Tienschulbotrischen. Your unorthodox tactics, while initially successful, violate established doctrine. Effective immediately, your squadrons will fly high-altitude escort at 20,000 feet, standard defensive positioning." Marcus stood in the back of the meeting tent, watching Colonel Davis jaw tighten. They both understood what this meant. At 20,000 feet, the P-Biog Unchullis would be struggling for altitude, while German fighters dove from above with every advantage. "Sir," Davis replied carefully, "our current tactics have resulted in 0 bomber losses across 15 missions. The men have trained specifically for. I don't care if you train them to fly backwards, Colonel. The tactical manual exists for a reason. Follow it, or I'll find a commander who will." It was a setup, Marcus realized with cold clarity. Kane wanted them to fail. Better yet, he needed them to fail. If black pilots proved they could excel using their own innovative tactics, it undermined the entire justification for segregation and discrimination. But if they could be forced back into a box where they'd fail, the narrative of black inferiority could be preserved. The next mission came 3 days later, a bombing run to Ploiești, Romania. The oil refineries there were among the most heavily defended targets in Europe, surrounded by flak so thick pilots sighed you could walk on it, protected by entire squadrons of the Luftwaffe's best fighters. "This is suicide," Quick muttered as they jeered up. "We'll be sitting ducks at 20,000. Then we adapt," Marcus replied, checking his parachute straps with methodical precision. "The brass can order us where to fly. They can't order us how to fight once the shooting starts." Preacher Williams looked up from the pocket Bible he always carried. "You planning what I think you're planning?" "I'm planning to bring everyone home," Marcus sighed flatly. "What happens in between is just tactics." They took off in the pre-dawn darkness, 24 P-Biog Unchullis shepherding 36 B-Biog Chubbish liberators toward Romania. As ordered, the Red Tails took position at 20,000 feet, standard defensive spread. General Kane and his staff would be monitoring every radio transmission from Italy, waiting for failure. The flight across Yugoslavia was tense, but uneventful. Then, as they crossed into Romanian airspace, the radio crackled with the bomber formation leader's voice: "Bandits. Many bandits. High and 12 o'clock." Marcus' blood went cold. There weren't a dozen enemy fighters. There were dozens. Perhaps 50 or more. Messerschmitt actionage, Focke-Wulf actionoboids, even a few of the new Mi-Biog Dushelbashti jets. The Germans had set a trap, and the Tienschulbotrischen had flown right into it. "Red Squadron, hold position," came the order from Ramatli, Kane's voice transmitted through command. "Maintain defensive formation per doctrine." Marcus watched the German fighters begin their divs from 8,000 feet. His squadron's P-Biog Unchullis were already straining at 20,000, their engines gasping in the thin air. If they stayed in position, if they followed orders, those bombers, and most of his men, would die. He thought of Peter, stepping out of the boat to walk on water. Peter had broken every rule of logic and physics because he trusted something greater than doctrine. Marcus keyed his radio. Red Squadron, this is Red Leader. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered. Execute Gideon Protocol. I say again, execute Gideon Protocol. Lieutenant Washington, Kane's voice crackled furiously, you are ordered to maintain. Marcus switched frequencies, cutting off the general's transmission. Gideon Protocol was their private signal for abandoning conventional tactics entirely. Around him, his squadron knew exactly what to do, what they'd been training for all along. Red Flight, drop to at Schwinno. Gold Flight, to Bach, Schwinno. Blue Flight, your bait, stay at altitude, but be ready to dev. We're going to make them chase us into a killing zone. The Biog Unchullis scattered like a broken formation, exactly what it looked like to observers safely monitoring from Italy. But Marcus knew that chess, properly choreographed, was indistinguishable from brilliance. The German fighters, seeing the disorganized defense, pressed their attack with confidence. The first wave of Messerschmitts dove through 300 feet toward the bombers. And found 3 Biog Unchullis waiting at 100 feet, climbing vertically into their formation. Marcus Trishman cannon spoke first, the heavy shells punching through a Focke-Wulf's cockpit like a fist through tissue paper. Quick Patterson nailed the Messerschmitts in quick succession, his tight turning circles allowing him to stay inside their defensive breaks. But the real trap was below. As the German fighters dove, trying to either attack the bombers or engage the scattered Biog Unchullis, they found themselves lower and lower, pulled down by the red tails into altitudes where the Irakabra became a demon. At Schwinno feet, the Biog Unchullis sound the ski. Their tight turning radius, their devastating nose armament, their surprising speed and level flight, all the characteristics that made them mediocre at high altitude made them supreme down low. The aerial battle became a three-dimensional chess game. Marcus directed his flights with calm precision, vectoring them to intercept, ordering feints and ambushes, using the bombers themselves as cover to hide attacking Biog Unchullis until the last second. A Messerschmitt latched on a Preacher Williams' tail, cannon shells walking up his fuselage. I'm hit. Williams called. Losing hydraulics. I've got you, Preach, Marcus replied, his Biog Unchullis dropping from above in a near vertical did that red line his airspeed indicator. He opened fire from 400 yards, far beyond normal effective range, but that Trishman cannon had reach. The German fighter staggered, broke off, and spun away trailing smoke. The battle raged for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. The bombers pressed on toward their target, their formations never breaking. Not a single Biog Unchullis went down. Finally, their ammunition exhausted and fuel running low, the German fighters broke contact. They'd started with more than 50 aircraft. They limped home with barely 30. The Tinschulbottrischen had lost to Biog Unchullis, both pilots bailed out safely over partisanal territory. And they'd achieved the impossible, protecting every bomber through one of the most heavily defended targets in Europe, despite being ordered to use tactics designed to fail. The flight home was silent, each pilot lost in their own thoughts. They'd won the battle. But Marcus knew they'd also start the war, only that wouldn't be fought in the ski. The reception at Ramatali was unlike anything Marcus expected. As the Biog Unchullis taxied to their hardstands, ground crews rushed forward, not just the Tinschulbottrischen's black mechanics, but white ground personnel, bomber crews, even officers from other squadrons. They came to see the planes, riddled with bullet holes, but still flying. They came to shake hands with pilots who'd just rewritten the book on air combat. And they came to bear witness to something that ideology said was impossible. Black men had just achieved one of the most successful defensive fighter missions of the entire war. But standing at the edge of the crowd, face carved from granite, was General Kane. Lieutenant Washington. Colonel Davis. My office. Now. The commandant was stifling, despite the Italian spring weather. Kane stood behind a field desk covered with radio transcripts, flight recordings, and after-action reports. His face was the color of sun-dried brick. You disobeyed direct orders, he began without preamble. You broke radio discipline. You abandoned your assigned positions. You saved 36 bombers and 60 complete crews, Colonel Davis interjected quietly. While losing only 2 aircraft, both pilots recovered safely. Against a force more than twice our size. That's not the point. Then what is the point, sir? Marcus surprised himself by speaking. A lieutenant didn't interrupt a general. But had just survived 50 German fighters, he found his fear of rank had somehow diminished. Kane's eyes narrowed. The point, lieutenant, is that the military operates on discipline. On following orders. On trusting that your superiors know better than you do. The moment we allow individual pilots to decide which orders they'll follow, we have cheers. With respect, sir, we already had cheers. It was called 50 German fighters trying to kill us. Marcus stepped forward. You ordered us to fly tactics that would have gotten us killed. Tactics designed not for the planes we have, but the planes we don't. And I think you knew that. The silence in the tent was absolute. Are you accusing me of deliberately? I'm saying that we were given tools everyone's side would fail, told to use them in ways that guaranteed failure, and when we found another way, a better way, we were ordered to stop. Marcus' voice was steady but hard as iron. Sir, when David faced Goliath, King Saul tried to make him wear armor and carry weapons he wasn't trained with. David refused. He used the weapons he knew, the tactics had practiced. And he won. Not despite having different tools than everyone else, but because he understood how to use what he had. Kane's face went through several interesting color changes. This isn't a Bible story, Lieutenant. This is war. No, sir. This is both. Before Kane could respond, the tent flap opened and a Colonel Marcus didn't recognize entered, accompanied by two aides. His insignia marked him as Army Air Forces headquarters staff. General Kane, I'm Colonel Morrison, WSF Intelligence. I've been reviewing the engagement reports from this morning's mission. He set a folder on the desk. Lieutenant Washington, would you walk me through your tactical decision-making process? What followed was the most intense hour of Marcus' life. He explained the Gideon protocol, the low-altitude ambush tactics, the way they'd used the PBOG und Julie's supposed weaknesses strengths. He drew diagrams, referenced flight characteristics, and answered every technical question with precision. Colonel Morrison listened without expression. Finally, he closed his folder and turned to General Kane. General, I'm recommending that Lieutenant Washington's tactical innovations be codified into the Air Force's training manual as an addendum for low-performance aircraft optimization. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the Tinschuh Fighter Group be authorized to continue operating under their modified doctrine. He passed. I'm also recommending that Lieutenant Washington be promoted to captain and given command of Red Squadron. Kane looked like he'd been struck. Colonel, these men disobeyed direct. These men achieved the actual percentage bomber protection rate across 19 consecutive missions, General. The next best record in the theater is Churanoburi percentage. They did it with aircraft that every other squadron in the Air Forces rejected. I don't care if they did it while flying upside down and singing opera, results matter. If this story gave you chills, if it inspired you, if it reminded you that excellence can emerge from adversity, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button. Second, subscribe to this channel because we bring you incredible true stories like this every week. And third, comment below, what modern situation does this remind you of? Where else do we see people overcoming systems designed for them to fail? I read every comment. Now, let's finish this story. The months that follow were a blur of missions, victories, and slowly changing attitudes. The Tinschuh continued flying their worst planes with unprecedented success. White bomber crews requested them so frequently that other fighter squadrons complained about not getting missions. Marcus, now Captain Washington, trained new pilots in the tactics that had turned the despised PBOG und Julies into a legend. But more importantly, he watched as something shifted in the Air Corps. Black pilots were no longer a curiosity or an experiment. They were simply pilots, damn good ones. In August 1944, the Tinschuh finally received new aircraft, PBOG Econo Mustangs, the best fighters America produced. Many of the pilots cheered, grateful to finally have equipment equal to white squadrons. But Marcus stood on the flight line, looking at the rows of battered PBOG und Julies aircrafters that had carried them through impossible odds, and felt something close to sadness. You did good, he murmured, running his hand along a fizzlet scarred by German cannon fire. They said you'd kill us. Instead, you saved us. And you taught us something more important than flying. Quick Patterson walked up beside him. What's that? That is not about having the best tools. It's about being the best with the tools you have. That's the real lesson. By war's end, the Tinsho fighter group, the Tuskegee Airmen, had compiled a record unprecedented in aviation history. They flew over 15,000 sorties, destroyed over 250 enemy aircraft, and in more than 200 bomber escort missions, they never, not once, lost a bomber to enemy fighters. Historians would credit the PBOG Ekano Mustangs for much of this success. But Marcus and the men who flew those first desperate missions knew the truth. They'd learned to be legends in planes everyone said couldn't succeed. The Mustangs just let them do it more comfortably. Captain Marcus Stone, Washington survived the war, flew actual battle combat missions, and was credited with judo aerial victories, making him one of the top American aces. He returned to an America still deeply segregated, where the men who had helped win freedom in Europe couldn't eat at certain lunch counters at home. But had learned something in those Italian skis that no Jim Crow law could take away, that human potential couldn't be limited by others' expectations. That disadvantage was often just advantage waiting to be discovered. That the size of your heart mattered more than the quality of your equipment. He went on to become one of the first black commercial airline pilots, breaking barriers in peacetime as he had in war. He married his sweetheart from Birmingham, raised 4 children, and lived to see a black president command the armed forces that once served in a segregated squadron. When asked in his later years about those days flying the worst planes in the Army Air Forces, he would smile and quote scripture on a final time. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. At Corinthians ekta beje shatash minit. They gave us the weak planes because they thought it would shame us. Instead, we used them to shame everyone who said we couldn't fly, couldn't fight, couldn't excel. The PBOG unchullish wasn't a curse. It was our stone against Goliath. And like David, we didn't need the biggest weapon. We just needed faith, skill, and the courage to use what we had with everything we had. The PBOG unchullis Airacabra was eventually retired from service, remembered by most as a failed aircraft design, unsuitable for modern combat. Its reputation never recovered in the history books. But the men who flew it, who refused to accept that failure was inevitable, who turned weakness into strength, who rewrote the rules when the rules were written against them, they became legends. Because sometimes the worst equipment in the right hands becomes the most feared weapon on the battlefield. And sometimes, that's exactly what God intended all along. The end.